Listen carefully, because what I'm about to reveal will separate you from 99% of people chasing wealth right now. There's a habit, practiced religiously by billionaires, that costs absolutely nothing, requires no capital, no connections, no special education. Yet this single practice has created more fortunes than every business plan, every startup pitch, every marketing strategy combined. And here's the kicker. Most people will hear about it today and completely ignore it by tomorrow. That's exactly why it works. That's exactly why the wealth gap keeps widening. While everyone else is hustling, grinding, attending seminars, and drowning in productivity hacks, the Zhenjiang elite are doing something so counterintuitive, so seemingly unproductive, that it remains invisible in plain sight. I'm talking about disciplined thinking time, not brainstorming sessions, not team meetings, not scrolling through motivational content pretending it's research. I mean dedicated, protected, rigorous thinking, the kind that requires you to sit still, shut out the world, and actually use your mind at full capacity. The research on this is absolutely stunning. Thomas Corley spent 5 years studying 177 self-made millionaires, people who built their fortunes from nothing. He discovered that 86% of them deliberately carve out 15 to 30 minutes every single day for pure contemplation and strategic thinking. Compare that to the average person, who spends essentially zero structured time in focused thought. Zero. And here's what's even more revealing. 96% of these millionaires maintain what Corley calls a solutions-oriented mindset, a mental framework they didn't stumble into by accident. They cultivated it through deliberate, daily reflection. Now, before we go deeper, let me be direct with you. If you're serious about understanding how wealth actually gets built at the highest levels, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. I'm not asking politely. I'm telling you that the strategies I reveal on this channel are the exact frameworks the ultra-wealthy use to compound their fortunes. Every week, I break down the psychological patterns, the decision-making systems, the invisible habits that separate millionaires from billionaires. If you skip subscribing, you're essentially telling yourself that you're comfortable staying where you are. So pause for 3 seconds, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and then come right back. Because what I'm about to show you about Ray Dalio's meditation practice alone is worth more than most business courses you'll ever pay for. Let me take you inside the mind of one of the most successful hedge fund managers in history. Ray Dalio built Bridgewater Associates into a $160 billion empire. $160 billion. To put that in perspective, that's larger than the GDP of most countries. And when journalists, when business school professors, when investors ask him what single habit contributed most to that success, he doesn't talk about his economic models, or his team structure, or his risk management systems. He points to something he started doing in 1968, 7 years before he even founded Bridgewater: transcendental meditation. Every single morning for 5 decades, 50 years without missing, Dalio has meditated for 20 minutes before he checks markets, before he attends meetings, before he makes a single decision. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Meditation sounds soft. It sounds like something people do when they can't handle real pressure. Let me destroy that misconception right now. Dalio describes his morning meditation as a 20-minute vacation that clears what he calls mental clutter. But here's what makes this different from some wellness trend. He approaches it with the same rigor he applies to analyzing global macroeconomic patterns. The neuroscience backs this up completely. Studies published in Brain and Cognition demonstrate that transcendental meditation reduces depression, anxiety, and stress, while dramatically improving mental clarity and cognitive flexibility. But forget the science for a moment. Let's talk about results. In 2008, while the entire financial world was collapsing, while legendary funds were losing billions, while supposed geniuses were getting wiped out, Ray Dalio saw it coming, months in advance. He recognized anomalies in mortgage derivatives that everyone else missed. He didn't miss them because he had better data. He had the same data everyone else had access to. He saw them because his mind was clear enough, sharp enough, disciplined enough to notice patterns that others overlooked. That single correct decision, made possible by the mental clarity his daily thinking practice provided, protected his fund during a period when his competitors were hemorrhaging money. Think about that. One decision, one correct read of a complex situation, enabled by a practice he'd been doing for 40 years that cost him nothing but 20 minutes each morning. But Dalio doesn't just meditate and hope for insights. He's codified his entire decision-making process into written principles. He maintains a living document of decision-making heuristics that he updates quarterly based on new experiences and outcomes. His morning routine includes what he calls a pre-market diagnostic, where he analyzes global asset movements before US markets open, cross-referencing overnight data with geopolitical developments. This isn't passive relaxation. This is systematic pattern recognition made possible by a mind that's been trained through decades of disciplined thinking time to spot opportunities that remain invisible to everyone else. Now let's talk about Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, because their approach reveals something even more fundamental about how wealth compounds through thought. Buffett operates on a principle that sounds almost laughably simple. Reading and thinking generate better investment decisions than constant activity. In fact, when he spoke to business students at Columbia in 2015, he revealed something that shocked most of them. Berkshire Hathaway holds virtually no formal meetings. None. Instead, Buffett and Munger devote most of their time to reading and thinking. Buffett's exact words were, "I can think of no better way to become more intelligent than to sit down and read." In fact, that's what Charlie and I mostly do. Here's where it gets interesting. The scale of this commitment is almost absurd. Buffett estimates that he dedicates 5 to 6 hours every single day to reading. That's 80% of his working hours, not 80% of his free time. 80% of the time most people would consider work. When he was starting his investing career, building the foundation that would eventually turn into a $900 billion company, he was reading between 600 and 1,000 pages per day. Let that sink in. While his competitors were attending meetings, schmoozing clients, appearing busy, Buffett was sitting in a room consuming financial reports, annual statements, business biographies, newspapers, economic analyses. And this wasn't casual reading. He was reading with a specific goal, to gain knowledge that would improve his decision-making. The compound effect has been astronomical. A $1,000 investment in Berkshire Hathaway in 1965 grew to over $12 million by recent calculations. The same investment in the S&P 500 over the same period, approximately 150,000. That's not a typo. 12 million versus 150,000. Buffett attributes this performance differential directly to thinking and reading. When someone asked him for his secret to success, he gestured to a stack of books and said, "Read 500 pages like this every day." That's how knowledge works. It builds up like compound interest. All of you can do it, but I guarantee not many of you will do it. And he's right. Because thinking time doesn't feel productive. There's no immediate dopamine hit, no checked boxes, no visible progress. It feels like you're doing nothing, which is exactly why most people abandon it. But here's what's actually happening during those hours of reading and reflection. You're building a mental database of patterns, principles, historical precedents, and causal relationships. You're training your brain to recognize opportunities and threats faster than people who don't have that database. You're essentially building a competitive advantage that's invisible to everyone else, but compounds exponentially over decades. Let me shift gears and show you how Jeff Bezos applies this same principle with a completely different methodology. Bezos, who built Amazon from an online bookstore into a trillion-dollar empire that fundamentally transformed multiple industries, limits himself to 3 good decisions per day. 3, not 30, not 300. 3. And this is deliberate. He understands something most people don't. Decision quality deteriorates rapidly when you make too many decisions. So instead of trying to maximize the number of decisions he makes, he concentrates his mental energy on the decisions that actually matter and blocks out specific hours of his day when he's most mentally sharp. Bezos applies what he calls the 70% rule. Once 70% of the information is available, he makes a decision rather than waiting for perfect information. This prevents analysis paralysis while maintaining high decision quality. He combines this with another thinking-based principle called disagree and commit, which encourages teams to debate thoroughly before deciding, then fully commit afterward, regardless of who won the debate. This isn't about being democratic or nice. It's about extracting maximum cognitive value from diverse perspectives before executing with unified force. The innovation velocity at Amazon flows directly from this thinking structure. Bezos employed a methodology he calls separable, single-threaded teams, integrated cross-functional groups whose sole focus is delivering one project until completion, with no distractions, no competing priorities. One company that implemented this exact methodology developed a new product in 8 weeks that changed the competitive intensity of their entire industry. But here's the key insight. The thinking that creates this structure, not the execution speed itself, is the real advantage. Most companies could technically execute fast if they set up the right structure, but they don't have the thinking time, the mental clarity, to design that structure in the first place. Now, if you think those examples are extreme, wait until you hear about Jack Dorsey. The founder of Twitter and Square takes thinking time to a level most people would consider completely impractical and borderline insane. For 5 consecutive years before the pandemic, Dorsey went on 10-day silent Vipassana meditation retreats. 10 days. Meditating from 4 in the morning until 9 at night. Complete silence. No phone, no computer, no communication of any kind. After finishing one of these retreats over the 2018 holidays, he tweeted, and I'm not making this up, "Just finished a 10-day silent meditation. Wow, what a reset. Fortunate and grateful I was able to take the time." Now, most people would look at that and think it's spiritual wandering or some Silicon Valley eccentricity. It's not. The ancient Vipassana technique is specifically designed to help you see things as they really are, cutting through cognitive bias, emotional reactivity, and the mental noise that clouds judgment. When you're running 2 major companies simultaneously, when you're making decisions that affect millions of users and thousands of employees, the ability to see situations clearly without your ego or emotions distorting the picture is worth more than any business strategy. Dorsey isn't doing this to feel peaceful. He's doing it to maintain the cognitive edge that keeps him competitive. Let me introduce you to a framework that explains why this habit is so powerful. Cal Newport, the author of Deep Work, identified what he calls the deep work practice, setting aside continuous stretches of time for focused, distraction-free work on your most challenging problems. He traces Microsoft's initial competitive advantage directly to this habit. In his 20s, Bill Gates and his co-founders Paul Allen and Monty Davidoff spent 2 weeks locked in Harvard's Aiken laboratory. They didn't study for their exams. They didn't socialize. They didn't maintain any semblance of balance. They focused entirely on building software. Newport writes that this commitment to deep work, uninterrupted, high-intensity focus, is precisely why Bill Gates was able to start a billion-dollar industry in less than a semester. Today, Gates maintains this exact practice. He reads approximately 50 books per year. He schedules specific time blocks for focused work. He often starts his day with an hour on the treadmill while watching educational content, feeding his mind even during physical exercise. And here's what's crucial. Gates doesn't just read for entertainment or general knowledge. He reads with specific learning objectives. He'll read 5 books on a single topic, say energy systems or vaccine development, to develop genuine expertise that informs his philanthropic decisions. This is reading as strategic thinking time, not as casual consumption. Now let's talk about the broader research foundation, because individual examples are compelling, but patterns across hundreds of wealthy individuals are conclusive. Steve Siebold, who became a self-made millionaire himself, spent 3 decades interviewing over 1,200 of the world's wealthiest people. He identified one nearly universal trait: extensive, intentional self-education through reading and thinking. When you walk into a wealthy person's home, you see an extensive library, not decorative books, used books, highlighted, annotated, referenced books that represent deliberate learning, not entertainment. The contrast with how average people spend their time is stark and uncomfortable. According to Thomas Corley's research, 67% of wealthy individuals watch television for 1 hour or less daily. Only 23% of poor people maintain that discipline. Corley also found that only 6% of the wealthy watch reality shows, while 78% of the poor do. Now, I'm not here to shame anyone about their entertainment choices. I'm here to show you that the difference between wealth and poverty isn't intelligence, isn't luck, isn't even work ethic in the traditional sense. It's attention allocation. It's what you feed your mind during the hours when you're not working. The wealthy ask themselves a specific set of questions during their thinking time, and these questions reveal the entire game. Corley found that self-made millionaires consistently ask, "What can I do to make more money? Does my job make me happy? Am I exercising enough? What relationships do I need to build or repair?" These aren't casual questions asked in passing. They're part of a disciplined thinking practice, often written down, often tracked over time, often reviewed weekly or monthly to measure progress. And right now, I want you to pause and ask yourself, when was the last time you sat down for even 15 minutes of uninterrupted thinking about your financial future? Not scrolling through investment advice on social media, not half listening to a podcast while commuting, actually sitting still and thinking deeply about where you are, where you want to be, and what specific decisions would close that gap. If you can't remember the last time you did that, you've just identified exactly why you're not where you want to be financially. And here's your opportunity to change it. Drop a comment right now telling me your biggest obstacle to building wealth. Be specific, because I read every comment, and the challenges you're facing are exactly what I address in upcoming content. Your comment isn't just engagement, it's your roadmap to the strategies you actually need. Let me show you how billionaires think differently about probability and risk, because this is where thinking time translates directly into asymmetric wealth creation. Stanley Druckenmiller, one of the greatest macro investors in history, said something that should fundamentally change how you approach every decision. It's not whether you're right or wrong that's important, but how much money you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong. This is asymmetrical thinking, and it's a concept most people never grasp. Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett exemplify this perfectly. They don't make bets where they're certain to win. They make bets where the potential upside far exceeds the potential downside, even if the probability of success is modest. They're looking for situations where they might risk $1 to make $10, even if the odds of winning are only 30%. Over enough bets, this approach compounds wealth at rates that seem impossible to people who only take safe bets with small upsides. Ray Dalio codified this principle across Bridgewater's entire culture. He trains every employee to think in terms of expected value, not just probability. Nassim Taleb's concept of fat tail risks and rewards, where the magnitude of outcomes matters more than their frequency, has become foundational to how billionaires make decisions. But here's the critical insight. This type of thinking doesn't emerge from casual reflection or gut instinct. It requires dedicated time to analyze probabilities, examine historical patterns, study statistical distributions, and question assumptions that most people never even recognize they're making. When Dalio sits down for his morning meditation and pre-market analysis, he's not just clearing his mind, he's calibrating his probability assessments. When Buffett reads 600 pages per day, he's building a mental database of how different economic scenarios played out historically. When Bezos limits himself to 3 decisions per day, he's preserving his cognitive capacity for the asymmetrical bets that will define Amazon's next decade. Thinking time is the mechanism that allows you to identify and evaluate asymmetrical opportunities that everyone else either misses or dismisses as too risky. Let me address the fundamental reason this habit produces wealth more reliably than business plans, because understanding this principle will change your entire approach to building wealth. Most business plans assume linear value creation. Work twice as hard, earn twice as much, hire twice as many people, produce twice as much output. This is fundamentally wrong. Billionaires understand something different. There's a non-linear relationship between time spent and value created. You cannot work 400 hours per week to make 10 times as much money because the week only has 168 hours. Physics constrains you. But you can multiply the value of each hour through superior thinking. One correct investment decision made by Warren Buffett in an hour of reading generates more wealth than 10,000 hours of manual labor. One strategic decision made by Jeff Bezos during his protected morning thinking time creates more value than a year of meetings. This is why thinking time compounds wealth in ways that activity never can. Corley's research found that self-made millionaires engage in what he calls dream setting. They create detailed scripts of their ideal life 10 to 15 years in the future and identify specific steps to reach it. This requires thinking time. They also maintain what Corley calls a positive mindset by reflecting on their experiences and actively seeking feedback, practices that demand deliberate contemplation. In contrast, only 8% of millionaires attributed their wealth to random luck. The overwhelming majority emphasized persistence and intentional decisions made through careful reflection. Now here's the uncomfortable truth about why this habit remains secret, despite being practiced openly by the world's most successful people. Thinking time produces no immediate results. There are no metrics to track daily improvement. A business plan generates activity, meetings, tasks, visible progress markers, things you can show your team or your investors or yourself to prove you're being productive. Thinking time generates only mental clarity, which produces invisible changes in decision quality that only compound into wealth over years and decades. In modern culture, dedicating hours to pure thinking seems irresponsible, even lazy. When Buffett tells people he spends 80% of his day reading, they assume he's being modest or exaggerating, or that reading somehow doesn't count as real work. When Dalio explains that he meditates for 20 minutes every morning regardless of market conditions, people think it's a luxury afforded by success, not recognizing it's the practice that created the success. When Bezos says he limits himself to 3 decisions per day, people think he's delegating everything else, not understanding that he's protecting the cognitive resource that matters most. The billionaires who practice this relentlessly are exceptions who maintain discipline that most people find unbearable. 20 minutes of meditation every single morning for 50 years, 6 hours of reading every single day for decades, 10-day silent retreats annually for 5 consecutive years. These aren't people with more time than you. Buffett had the same 24 hours when he was starting out. Dalio had the same 24 hours when he was building Bridgewater from nothing. They chose to allocate those hours differently, and they maintained that allocation with religious consistency even when it seemed unproductive, even when others were passing them invisible metrics of activity. Bezos's insight about decision capacity is perhaps the most practically useful. Most people can handle only 3 good decisions per day, and decision quality declines dramatically after that threshold. This means your decision-making capacity is fundamentally limited. You can't just decide more and better simultaneously. The people who protect their thinking time and reserve their peak cognitive hours for important decisions gain an edge that scales across years. Every slightly better decision compounds. Every avoided bad decision preserves capital and opportunity. Over decades, this creates wealth gaps that seem impossible to bridge. Let me show you how to implement this practically, because understanding the theory is worthless if you don't change your behavior. The secret billionaire habit requires 3 elements, and none of them involve spending money or acquiring resources you don't have. First, protected time blocks. You must schedule thinking time like a non-negotiable meeting. Dalio meditates every morning at the same time. Buffett reads for 5 hours daily without exception. Bezos protects his morning hours for decision-making and refuses to schedule anything important in the afternoon when his cognitive capacity is depleted. The specific practice matters less than the consistency and the absolute protection from interruption. If you tell yourself you don't have time, you're lying. You have the same 24 hours as everyone else. What you're really saying is that you're not willing to give up whatever you're currently doing with those hours, and that's fine. Just be honest about it. But understand that as long as you maintain your current time allocation, you'll maintain your current results. If you want different results, you need different inputs. Start with 15 minutes tomorrow morning, not when you feel like it, not when you have extra time. Tomorrow morning, 15 minutes protected, non-negotiable. Sit somewhere quiet and think about one specific question. what decision could I make this month that would most improve my financial situation? Second element, intentional content consumption. You cannot read or watch everything equally. Millionaires read to learn specific things: financial reports, biographies of successful people, historical analysis, technical knowledge in their field. The goal isn't entertainment or even general education. The goal is to feed your mind material that improves decision-making capability in your specific domain. If you're in real estate, you should be reading market analyses, economic forecasts, case studies of successful developments. If you're building a business, you should be reading about business models, customer psychology, operational systems. If you're investing, you should be reading annual reports, economic history, books on probability and decision-making. Buffett doesn't read novels during his 6 hours of daily reading. Gates doesn't watch random YouTube videos during his educational content time. They curate their inputs with the same discipline they apply to their outputs. And here's what's critical. They maintain this discipline even when the immediate application isn't clear. Buffett reads widely across industries, even ones he doesn't invest in, because patterns in one industry often reveal opportunities in another. This is how you build the mental database that generates insights others miss. Third element, reflection and documentation. Dalio maintains his written principles document. Corley's research shows that 86% of millionaires spend 15 to 30 minutes daily in strategic thinking, and many of them write down their thoughts. This isn't undirected daydreaming. It's structured reflection on goals, decisions, and outcomes. What worked this month? What didn't? What patterns am I noticing? What assumptions am I making that might be wrong? What opportunities am I dismissing too quickly? What risks am I underestimating? I want you to start a thinking journal tomorrow. Not a gratitude journal, not a diary, a thinking journal. Every day, write down one decision you made and one decision you need to make. Then write down what information you need to make the pending decision better and where you'll get that information. Review this journal weekly. You'll start noticing patterns in your decision-making. You'll identify recurring mistakes. You'll spot opportunities you keep missing. This documentation process transforms vague intuition into actionable intelligence. If you're serious about implementing this, not just nodding along but actually changing your behavior, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now. Because next week, I'm breaking down the specific reading list that billionaires used to build their mental frameworks. The exact books that Warren Buffett credits with changing his investment approach. The specific texts that Ray Dalio studied before developing his principles. The frameworks that Jeff Bezos used to structure Amazon's decision-making culture. This isn't generic book recommendation content. This is the intellectual ammunition that builds billion-dollar fortunes. And if you're not subscribed, you'll miss it. Which means you'll keep operating with the same mental frameworks you have now. Your choice. Let me address one more critical aspect of this practice that most people completely misunderstand: the relationship between thinking time and action. Some people hear about Buffett spending 80% of his day reading, and they assume he's not taking action. This is exactly backward. The thinking time doesn't replace action. It ensures that when you do act, your actions are exponentially more effective. Buffett makes fewer investment decisions than almost any other major investor. But each decision is informed by decades of accumulated knowledge and pattern recognition. His actions are rare, but devastatingly effective. Dalio doesn't spend 20 minutes meditating instead of analyzing markets. He meditates so that when he does analyze markets, he sees patterns others miss. Bezos doesn't limit himself to 3 decisions per day because he's lazy. He limits himself to 3 because he knows that his 4th, 5th, and 6th decisions will be lower quality. And low-quality decisions destroy value faster than high-quality decisions create it. The thinking time is what makes the action valuable. Without the thinking, you're just busy. With the thinking, you're strategic. This distinction is crucial because our culture celebrates busyness and mistakes activity for progress. You see people bragging about working 16-hour days, attending endless meetings, responding to hundreds of emails, and they genuinely believe they're being productive. But if you look at their results over 5 or 10 years, they've barely moved forward. They've been busy, but they haven't been effective. Meanwhile, the billionaires who spend hours reading, thinking, meditating, the ones who look like they're hardly working, are compounding wealth at rates that seem impossible. The research is unambiguous on this point. Tom Corley's study of 177 self-made millionaires, Steve Siebold's interviews with 1,200 wealthy individuals, Cal Newport's framework for deep work, the documented habits of every billionaire I've discussed today, they all point to the same principle. Disciplined thinking time produces more wealth than business plans because it compounds decision quality across decades. This isn't theory. This isn't speculation. This is documented, repeated, verifiable evidence across hundreds of the world's wealthiest people. But here's what makes this habit truly secret. Knowledge without action is worthless. You now know what Ray Dalio does every morning. You know how Warren Buffett spends his days. You know why Jeff Bezos limits his decisions. You know the research showing that 86% of millionaires practice daily strategic thinking. But knowing this changes nothing. Acting on it changes everything. And the brutal reality is that most people who watch this video, who nod along, who think that makes sense, they won't change a single thing about their daily routine. They'll go right back to checking social media, watching television, staying busy without being strategic. That's not you. You're still here, which means you're different. You're in the minority, willing to hear uncomfortable truths about why you're not where you want to be financially. You're willing to consider that maybe the problem isn't that you need better opportunities or more capital or different circumstances. Maybe the problem is that you've never built the mental infrastructure that identifies opportunities, evaluates them correctly, and executes on them decisively. Let me give you the clearest possible path forward. Starting tomorrow, implement a 15-minute morning thinking session before you check your phone, before you open your laptop, before you do anything else. Set a timer. Sit somewhere quiet. Focus on one specific question related to your wealth-building goal. Don't try to solve everything at once. One question. 15 minutes daily, non-negotiable. Do this for 30 days and document your thoughts. At the end of 30 days, you'll have accumulated 7.5 hours of focused strategic thinking, more than most people do in a year. You'll have generated insights about your situation that you couldn't have accessed through any amount of activity or busy work. After you establish that morning practice, add a 30-minute reading block. Not social media, not news, not entertainment. Strategic reading. Financial reports if you're investing. Industry analyses if you're building a business. Biographies of successful people in your field. Marketing case studies if you're growing a brand. Technical knowledge that makes you better at what you do. 30 minutes daily is 3.5 hours per week. 182 hours per year. That's 4 full weeks of working hours per year dedicated to building your mental database. Compounded over a decade, that's a competitive advantage that becomes almost impossible for your competitors to overcome. The third element, weekly reflection, requires only 20 minutes on Sunday. Review your thinking journal from the week. Identify the decision you made that had the best outcome. Identify the decision you made that had the worst outcome. Write down what you learned from both. Write down one pattern you're noticing in your decision-making. Write down one assumption you made that might be wrong. This reflection process is how you accelerate learning from experience instead of just accumulating experience. This entire system, 15 minutes of morning thinking, 30 minutes of daily reading, 20 minutes of weekly reflection, requires a total of 5 hours and 35 minutes per week. Less time than most people spend watching television in a single day. Less time than you spent scrolling social media this week. But implemented consistently over a year, over 5 years, over a decade, this practice will transform your decision-making capability, your opportunity recognition, your wealth-building trajectory in ways that no amount of hustling or networking or course-taking ever could. Now let's be completely honest about the obstacles you'll face. The first week will feel uncomfortable because you're not used to sitting still with your thoughts. Your mind will wander. You'll feel like you're wasting time. You'll want to check your phone, respond to messages, do something that feels productive. Push through it. That discomfort is exactly why this habit is rare and valuable. If it were easy and comfortable, everyone would do it, and it wouldn't provide a competitive advantage. The second week, you'll start having insights, but they'll seem obvious or trivial. You'll think, I already knew that, or that's just common sense. Write them down anyway. What seems obvious when you articulate it clearly is often something you've been ignoring in practice. The gap between what you know intellectually and what you do behaviorally is where all your unrealized potential lives. By week 3 or 4, you'll have at least one genuinely valuable insight, a realization about a pattern in your decision-making, an opportunity you've been overlooking, a relationship between two things you didn't connect before. That one insight, if acted upon, will generate more value than dozens of hours of unfocused activity, and you'll start to understand viscerally why billionaires protect their thinking time so zealously. The real magic happens after 6 months, after a year, after you've accumulated hundreds of hours of focused strategic thinking and thousands of pages of curated reading. You'll start making decisions that seem obvious to you but brilliant to others. You'll spot opportunities before your competitors see them. You'll avoid mistakes that everyone else walks into. You'll have developed what looks like intuition but is actually pattern recognition built through disciplined practice. This is exactly how Ray Dalio predicted the 2008 crisis. This is exactly how Warren Buffett identifies undervalued companies. This is exactly how Jeff Bezos structures Amazon to innovate faster than companies 10 times older. They didn't start with better intuition than you. They built superior decision-making capability through decades of disciplined thinking time. And while you can't replicate decades overnight, you can start building that capability today. Every day you delay is another day you're competing with outdated mental software while your competitors upgrade theirs. Here's your final challenge, and this is where we separate people who want to change from people who actually will change. Before you close this video, before you move on to the next piece of content, open a document or grab a notebook. Write down 3 specific decisions you need to make in the next 30 days that will impact your financial trajectory. Could be whether to start a side business, whether to switch jobs, how to invest your next $1,000, which skills to develop, what relationships to build. 3 decisions, write them down right now. Then, for each decision, write down what information you need to make that decision better. Do you need to understand the market better? Do you need to talk to people who've done it before? Do you need to analyze historical data? Do you need to clarify your own goals and constraints? Be specific, because here's what's about to happen. During your 15-minute morning thinking sessions this week, you're going to focus on these 3 decisions. You're going to use your 30-minute reading blocks to gather the information you identified. And by the end of the week, you're going to make at least one of these 3 decisions with more clarity and confidence than you've ever brought to a financial decision before. This is the practice. This is how thinking time translates into wealth, not through magical inspiration or sudden breakthroughs, but through systematic improvement in decision quality, repeated daily, compounded over time. The billionaires I've discussed today didn't invent this practice. They simply committed to it with a level of discipline that most people won't match. Ray Dalio built a $160 billion fund through meditation practice he started in 1968 and maintained for 50 years. Warren Buffett turned $1,000 into $12 million by dedicating 80% of his day to reading and thinking. Jeff Bezos built a $1 trillion company by limiting himself to 3 decisions per day to protect decision quality. The habit requires nothing but mental discipline and time allocation. It's counterintuitive because our culture celebrates activity and speed over thoughtfulness and depth. The world rewards people who look busy, who attend lots of meetings, who respond instantly to messages, who hustle visibly. But the billionaires who practice thinking time most religiously, those who seem to work less than everyone else, accumulate wealth at rates that compound far beyond everyone else's reach. They're playing a different game entirely, one where thinking replaces hustling, where decision quality replaces decision quantity, where strategic patience replaces reactive speed. And this is exactly why Tom Corley observed that the self-made millionaires in his study asked themselves consistently, "What can I do to make more money?" They weren't asking through constant activity or frantic experimentation. They were asking through disciplined daily thinking time that revealed opportunities and improved decisions that ordinary people never encountered. The question isn't whether this practice works. The evidence is overwhelming and conclusive. The question is whether you have the discipline to implement it when it feels unproductive, when your peers are out-hustling you in visible ways, when the results remain invisible for months or years, before suddenly compounding into outcomes that seem miraculous to everyone who didn't see the quiet, disciplined preparation. You now possess knowledge that 99% of people pursuing wealth don't have. You understand the exact habit that separated millionaires from everyone else in the largest studies ever conducted on wealth creation. You know the specific practices of billionaires who built the largest fortunes in modern history. You have a concrete implementation plan that requires less than 6 hours per week. Everything you need is right in front of you. The only question that matters now is, what will you do with this information? Will you let it become another interesting idea you encountered and forgot? Or will you take the one action that changes trajectories, starting tomorrow morning, 15 minutes, one question, no distractions, no excuses? Your future wealth is built in those moments of disciplined thinking that no one else sees, no one else values, no one else practices. That's exactly why it works. That's exactly why it's your competitive advantage. Now go claim it.